We're going to get started with this second session of the day, Queer and Classics, or yeah, I think that's the title of the session. So to start us off, we have Kat Lambert, who is a PhD student here at Columbia. She researches bookworms, both entomological and philological. She's helped organize this conference, and she's going to start off the session with a workshop on not to be included, where Ahmed taught me about being a Dyke, a feminist, and a classicist.
Okay, thank you, Izzy, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm not going to talk like this. That's not going to work. Right, I'm going to start by offering a short recusatio. So I am not going to offer up any groundbreaking claim, earth-shattering theory about what it means to be a dyke and/or hopefully a feminist in classics. Rather, I'm going to, as my title suggests, talk about what Sara Ahmed taught me about being those things. Namely, what I'm going to focus on is how the simple act of describing your ordinary, everyday experiences and sensations in the world, of accounting for the ways in which your body does and does not pass into the world, brings you home to feminism. And my goal is for these remarks simply to provide a framework for us to engage in an activity together afterwards. Feminism is sensational. Feminism begins with sensation, with a sense of things. Feminism is sensible because of the world we are in. Feminism is a sensible reaction to the injustices of the world, which we might register at first through our own experiences. We might mull over these experiences. We might keep coming back to them because they do not make sense. In other words, we have to make sense of what does not make sense. So these words belong to Sara Ahmed, who is a queer critical theorist, author of, brought with me, Living a Feminist Life, on being included, racism and diversity in institutional life, among many other things. She has a blog, feministkilljoys.com, highly recommend that. And I'm going to be referencing these works throughout. So in this book, in Living a Feminist Life, Sara Ahmed does not cite any white men. In her words, citation is feminist memory. Citation is how we acknowledge our debt to those who came before, those who helped us find our way when the way was obscured because we deviated from the paths we were told to follow. Citations can be feminist bricks. They are the materials from which we create our dwellings. My citation policy has affected the kind of house I have built. And I would just like to make a point of citing the person who first urged me to read, Sara Ahmed, who was Liz Butterworth, a good friend of mine, a former colleague, and I think a feminist brick to many. So something as basic and routine as bibliography can become the site of feminism and inclusive pedagogy. So this is how Ahmed has built her house, and here she's clearly channeling Audre Lorde, and she explicitly references her in her book. The house is a useful metaphor for feminism. It is true that feminist theory is what people in the academy do. Maybe you go to school to do feminist theory. But it is also true that we generate feminist theory and community in other spaces, in everyday spaces. And my house was the first place I learned about feminism. I learned the greatest feminist lessons from my single mother who transitioned from a professor of English to a stay-at-home full-time caretaker for my nonverbal autistic brother. And I didn't know this, of course, as a child, but every day after school, I was coming home to feminism. So for the remainder of my time, I'm going to focus on two other metaphors that Ahmed works with, one of them being the path, and the third one, the chair. And again, my goal is simply to sketch out a framework that'll be useful for us to think about the various sensations we've had navigating institutions, whether secondary school, university, etc., from a feminist and queer perspective. So first, the path. Ahmed describes coming out like this. I made a dramatic redirection. I left a certain kind of life and embraced a new one. I became a lesbian. I had tried heterosexuality. Heterosexuality was something I was wearing. When you have to try hard to convince yourself of something, it usually means you are not convinced. Heterosexuality did not fit. When I was wearing it, I found it wearing it. And this is the kind of wordplay that Ahmed is just like, she's absolutely contagious with, and it makes reading her theory like such a incredible pleasure. So in pursuing a path partway and turning back, I learned about that path. To leave a path can be to leave a life, even though when you leave heterosexuality, you still live in a heterosexual world. But this is what leaving heterosexuality felt like. Leaving a life that is supported. Leaving a world where your being is supported. You have to create your own support systems. Queer and feminist worlds are built through the effort of those to support those who are not supported because of who they are, what they want, what they do. So when I was in high school, my first couple of years of college, remaining closeted was the safe thing for me to do. It let me take the path of least resistance. I did not meet a lesbian until college, either in person or in fiction, anything else like that. And I understood Dyke as an insult used in the high school locker room. So representation, visibility, citational practice, not only do they make other paths appear, but they make other paths seem traversable. So on the one hand, part of what increasing diversity and access in classics means is creating more accessible, traversable paths. On the other hand, I think we need to think harder about what it actually means for the spaces at the ends of these paths to be inclusive. And we can think about the rhetoric of diversity in institutions and universities on this point. So ostensibly, they want to be inclusive, to incorporate diverse perspectives. Diversity enriches the student body. And this is what Ahmed, on being included, racism and diversity in institutional life, characterizes as the feel-good politics of diversity. So she writes, quoting bell hooks, "Diversity evokes the pleasures of consumption. The bodies of others, by adding spice and color, liven up the dull dish that is mainstream white culture." Okay, so in this image of gummy bears, right, diversity involves both aestheticizing color, and the fact that they are sort of candy gummy bears demands that those of color be sweet in order to sort of fit in with the rest of the bears. Right, so we're familiar probably with slogans sort of come in, right, we're welcome to all are welcome. And in chapter 4 of this book, on racism in institutions, Ahmed describes how these statements of inclusion, tacked onto pamphlets, official emails, that sort of thing, actually function as non-performatives. She calls this non-performatives, which means they claim to be doing something. That is, we commit to diversity, we commit to increasing access, committing to anti-racism. But in fact, this claim does not bring about what it claims to do. It just sort of sits there as a paper trail, but is not backed up by any action. So simply saying that you're an inclusive space does not make your space inclusive. Saying that everyone will find comfort does not mean everyone will be comfortable. This is all quite perhaps abstract by now, so we can concretize it with the metaphor of the chair. Okay, so here's Ahmed on the chair. I often think about the politics of comfort through chairs. Furniture is always good to think with. Think of how it feels to be comfortable. Say you are sinking into a comfortable chair. Comfort is about the fit between body and object. My comfortable chair might be awkward for you with your differently shaped body. Heteronormativity functions as a form of public comfort by allowing bodies to extend into spaces that have already taken their shape. Those spaces are lived as comfortable as they allow bodies to fit in. The surfaces of social space are already impressed upon by the shape of such bodies, like a chair that acquires its shape by the repetition of some bodies inhabiting it. We can almost see the shape of bodies as impressions in the surface. Spaces extend bodies, and bodies extend spaces. The impression acquired by surfaces function as traces of such extensions. Heteronormativity also becomes a form of comforting. If you do not inhabit heterosexuality, when faced by the comforts of heterosexuality, you may feel uncomfortable. The body does not sink into a space that has already taken its shape. Queers might be asked not to make others feel uncomfortable by not displaying any signs of queer intimacy. You might be asked to tone it down, or you might decide to tone it down to avoid creating discomfort. The availability of comfort for some bodies may depend on the labor of others and the burden of concealment. So when you encounter resistance, when you sit in a chair that was not made for you, you gain insight into how systems of oppression, exclusion, and hierarchies are propelled and reproduced. If you do not come up against these restrictions in an institution, if you sit in a chair, great, and it fits, you experience the institution as open and diverse, inclusive, right? Whence the claim, I didn't experience harassment, XYZ, therefore XYZ organization is comfortable for all. So what work do we need to do to make institutions more inclusive? Ahmed develops a really neat sort of double definition of diversity work. And this is also from racism and diversity in institutional life. So first, diversity work as the work that has the explicit aim of transforming an institution. So someone who works in an office for diversity, someone who's on a diversity committee. Second, okay, this is sort of for innovation, diversity work can be what is required, what we do when we do not quite inhabit the norms of an institution. And often if you don't inhabit the norms of an institution, if you are a person of color, if you are homosexual, etc., you are often given the task of transforming these norms. Okay, so when we describe the effects of inhabiting institutional spaces that do not give us residence, that may give us a seat at the table, right? But that seat is uncomfortable for us, it doesn't fit. We are in effect doing diversity work. So I'll just offer briefly an example from my own experience. So after I graduated from college, I had a one-year fellowship to teach at Eton College, an all-boys school in England. And there were many frustrating things about this experience, as you can imagine. One of them being that there was sort of no lesbians in like a 20-kilometer radius. But a really frustrating thing that was actually like quite mundane, and so I didn't really fully process it until sort of after I'd done this whole year, was the issue of clothes and dress code. So in the master's handbook, men were given sort of page-length description of what they're supposed to wear. So pinstripe trousers, a white oxford, a black waistcoat, white stiff collar, white, bow tie, and like the addresses of like 3 tailor shops where you could go obtain this outfit for like a 10% staff discount. For women, it was black suit or skirt. It was like 1, 2, 3, 4 words, and that was it. So I wore essentially like miscellaneous funeral garb for 1 year. Right, so my clothing, when I was walking around, right, inhabiting this institution, it did not signal me as a teacher, which is to say as a male teacher, right? I was like with the other dozen women at our funeral going party. And so I was frequently mistaken for an intruder on campus. I was sometimes sort of asked to leave buildings in which I was. I either experienced that, or very frequently I was misgendered as a schoolboy. Yeah, which was very sad, and really really quite painful. I think I repressed a lot of it, and it was just really like fucked up. I'm sorry. Okay, so there was during the time when I worked there was like a 20-minute period during each school day where all of the staff would. There was a break between the classes, and all the staff would go to this like ornate hall to this meeting called chambers, where you could sort of, the point was to conduct business, which basically meant to be like, you know, Magnus is just really like faffing off in Latin 1, like, can you please, like, you know, like give him some demerits or something like that. It's like from the days before there was email, and they all had to get together, and they just still do it. But anyway, all the staff, you had to wear black academic gown for this meeting. The reason being that, so academic gowns, if you've ever seen one, they have these long tails sort of on the side. They're not really tails, they're sort of like wings actually, because they're on the side. But the point was that if sort of one master was engaged in business with another master, you had to sort of stake your claim in line and like grab onto that master's tail of the gown so that they like couldn't get away. So that was ostensibly the point of wearing academic gown. So I didn't have an academic gown. I like threw away my like sticky, plasticky one after graduating college, so I got one on loan. And it was like down to the floor, like falling off my shoulders. But it was this like odd feeling of being included because I was finally sort of in the same dress as the majority male staff. But it was also a constant, very material reminder that I was inhabiting an institution that was not made for me. And so when I read this quote from Ahmed's book, I just like, it was a very emotional experience for me because it just like sums up really how I felt about everything. So an institution is like an old garment. It has acquired the shape of those who tend to wear it, such that it becomes easier to wear if you have that shape. Okay, so talking about dress code, thinking about how I didn't fit in, it sounds kind of mundane, but this is how we learn about institutions. This is what Ahmed says. How we learn about the shortcomings of various approaches to be inclusive of people who are not affluent, white, cis, het men. Okay, so this is a conference on inclusive classics pedagogy, and I haven't really talked about classics at all, although I certainly could, but I've really been talking generically about institutions. But part of this reason is because I think in our field, when we talk about inclusion, we need to sort of zoom out and be a bit more precise about what we actually mean when we say inclusion. It needs to go beyond sort of putting out statements of we are an inclusive space, right? The statements that Ahmed says become non-performatives. Okay, simply because you say you're open to all does not entail that all will feel comfortable inhabiting the social spaces, right? The garments, the chairs, the bathrooms, etc. of your institution. And we really need to go beyond the approach of add women and stir, or like add people of color and stir, add XYZ and stir. Right? We need to, as Ahmed advocates, rewrite the world from the perspective of those who do not pass into it. We need to build a new house with new bricks. So for the next sort of, is it 11 o'clock? Yeah, the next like 15 minutes, I thought we would actually build a house together. So I have these note cards, which can be bricks. And I was thinking, so you can take this time to reflect. We have like a long day ahead of us, so this might be a nice time to reflect. And right, so Ahmed says her bricks, right, are sort of her citations are feminist bricks. So if you want to just put a citation, that's fine. If you want to describe an experience you've had, right, because that is doing diversity work, right, describing how you do or do not fit into a space to sort of uncover the systems of exclusion there, or a memory or something like that. And I thought we might sort of tape them on the wall in a house shape, very sort of old school, but, and we'll have pens. Sorry, I'm standing here not passing out the bricks. If you think you need more than one brick, you can have more than one brick. I have a lot of cards. Sure.
Now, when you have a chance, would you repeat the sorts of things that you should write on the card?
Yeah.
Do you want me to hand out stuff while you're repeating stuff?
Yeah. Well, I can talk. I can talk and walk. So yeah, I mean, right. So the key points were like citational practice. Oh, here we go. Pass them down. A simple description, right? So I sort of described how the dress code didn't work for me at my former employer. It can also just be something that what would you want to see on the walls of like the new inclusive house of classics or pedagogy, as it were, as you walk into it. It can be names of people as well, right? Citations of authors or works that you want other people to read. It actually is very hard to pass out and walk. I'm so sorry. There are many more.
You grab some time.
Oh, yeah. anyone not over it?
Oh, no.
Let me and then I'll shut up.
Oh, that one.
Right there.
Yeah. Is there some way you might be able to find like a big sheet of paper or something that you could tape up to that wall and take the cards to that so that we can like keep it intact?
Oh,
Yeah, the
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Judging by the lively conversation that you're all done molding your bricks, if you feel comfortable, if you're willing, if you want to, you can start. You can put your brick up as part of the house. If you don't want to, if you want to just keep your brick yourself, that's also totally fine. When I thought about this activity, I didn't actually think about building a house, but we're gonna do it right now in 5 minutes before our next presenter comes. I've got a bunch of tape, so I guess. Oh, this isn't even. Whose brick is this? It's on the iPad. Yeah. No. This is yours. Yeah. I did not write this, but I have this is a really great brick. I'm sorry, who's?
I think it's Greg.
Oh,
Yeah.
Greg. We're gonna do Greg's brick.
The foundation.
Yeah, now the foundational stones. You can also, I guess, pass up and get it.
Yeah.
Also looking out so far. Oh, my God. Oh, my days. Right, we're gonna do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really good.
Yeah, switch out.
Kat, we're good to switch to the next presentation, right?
Hey, fellow amazing tech person. Just like automatically.
Like how do you know, like the PowerPoint you hit F5?
Love it. Perfect. Thank you.
you know how to use it. No, awesome. I'm glad that one of us does, because I can change all. You can start. Oh wait, no, I have to do this. But yeah, sure.
All right, so we are going to start with our next presentation for the session. So we're starting with the next presentation. So next up is Kristin Masters, who's presenting on LGBT means SPQR, resources and lesson plans for including LGBTQIA voices in Latin curriculum. Kristin Masters has been teaching Latin at high school level for 16 years and has been an adjunct teacher of Latin at Rowan University for over a decade. Her latest book, Troy on Trial, an intermediate Latin reader, was recently published by NPR. Thank you. Ooh. A little tangling happening, but I'll just take this off for now and we can fix it.
Now
that
you
way.
have your presentation, that's the rule.
Here
Here you go.
It chose me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Excalibur. Thank you. Everyone hear me? Great, thank you. And thank you, Kat. It was amazing. And thank you, my hero, whose name I don't know. What is your name? Katie. Katie, and thank you, Katie, for helping me get this off. So again, my name is Kristin Masters, and I'm here to talk to you about LGBTQIA voices and why they're not in Latin classrooms. So my objective is for you, by the end of this presentation, for you to understand the need to address the absence of LGBTQIA plus representation in high school Latin curriculum. Sorry, this is more for high school than college, but there's a lot of overlap. I hope you can create a classroom environment that is receptive and respectful towards conversations about gender, sexuality, and inclusivity. And then finally, to incorporate culturally authentic LGBTQIA plus content into high school Latin curriculum. So we can enhance representation and foster conversations about ancient and modern perceptions of gender, sexuality, and inclusivity. I do this primarily through my blog, lgbtmeetspqr.com. Don't worry, it'll be on the screen, so you don't have to write it. But that was my purpose, that I wanted to address this absence of resources appropriate for 14-year-olds who are questioning themselves and questioning their place in the world. And let me just start by identifying the problem. So on the left is what you see if a teenager looks in a high school, uses their school computer to look up LGBT issues in the ancient world. And on the right, as you see this lovely lady fellating a satyr, this is what happens on their cell phone if you look up the Wikipedia article on sexuality in ancient Rome. There is no middle ground. And whereas a plethora of information, it's always better to have more information than not enough information. If you have a 14-year-old kid, maybe you wouldn't want them seeing an active fellatio that young. I don't know, it's up to you. So there's no middle ground. There's no high school appropriate things. And when a teacher says, oh, I don't know, maybe you should research, this is what they're getting. So that's the student end, but the teacher end is much more bleak. So I don't know, can we get a hand, or how many of us are teachers, are high school, middle school, elementary school? Yes, yes. Okay, how many of us are college professors? Woo! Okay, so I do both, so I'm like, woo. Are any of us anything that is neither? Like, oh, I'm a grad student, I'm a student, undergrad. Woo! Can we get a head start for our rising scholars? Yes, wonderful. So here is the world that we live in as educators. Textbooks, our Latin textbooks have nothing that is not heteronormative. Unless you might get a nice little gloss about, like, you know, Zeus became a swan and 9 months later Helen was born. That's it, that's what we got. There's no textbook and curriculum in place already. It's 2020 and I made a blog because I was like, where is it? Where is it all? There's no time for teachers between everything we have to do. There's no time, there's no money, there's resources for professional development. Our professional development is created by our administrators. And if there's maybe some money left over, we can branch out and do something of our own, but we have to find it ourselves. So there's no time, there's no access to authentic Latin texts that can kind of help elucidate this. and there's no access to secondary scholarship. There's amazing secondary scholarship out there in the last 20 years on Roman sex and gender studies, and high school teachers do not have access to it. I am so happy that I am a hybrid, both a high school teacher and an adjunct professor, and I have that lovely, lovely college library card, and I have access to interlibrary loan. I can get any book I want, and I know they exist because I have interlibrary loan. And like, that's not the story for most of my peers. So it's pretty hard. It is pretty hard, and that is why I'm here. So let's talk about what we can do to help make our classrooms more receptive and respectful. The first thing we can do is stuff you're already doing. Everything you are already doing, you just keep being you. I don't know if you remember your APRs or your PIPs that you have to do every year, that they tell you to write continue to, right? Not I will contact parents, but I will continue to contact parents, because that's what you're already doing. So continue to be you, right? Continue to give. You're here for a reason. You chose to take your President's Day weekend, your Saturday off to come here to learn about how to be a better teacher, and that is amazing. So can we get a round of applause? Something that is amazing, you should be applauded for. So keep being you, keep having your energy, keep having your enthusiasm, keep loving your students. Continue to respect your students' identities by using their proper pronouns and names, right? If a kid is Steven, don't assume he's Steve, right? Make sure whatever their name is that they want to be called is what they get called. Continue to foster a sense of school community. And I can't stress this enough. Make sure every student feels that they are part of something bigger than themselves. Encourage them to go to football games. Encourage them to join yearbook. Advertise every time the school has a play. Be part of that school community. Encourage the kids to become part of that community so they know that they are not alone. Continue to be an ally to all students, every single student, by modeling empathy to every single student. And modeling understanding and encouraging them to do the same. Be mindful of HIV, that's harassment, intimidation, and bullying, as well as microaggressions that can damage a student's identities. Every public school teacher has to do training in this, correct? Or at least in New Jersey. Yeah, okay. So I don't want to bore you on like what, every school is going to have their own guidelines, every state is going to have their own guidelines. But just be aware that you will not see everything. You can't. Right? That is just, you're one person and there's 30 people in that classroom. You can't see everything, but just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and make sure you have a good relationship with your students so they can feel comfortable talking to you. Encourage students to expand their understanding of topics by giving them adequate and inclusive choices and research topics in their lessons. All right, here's where it gets hard. Challenge yourself to tackle uncomfortable topics in your classroom. Use the curriculum to create opportunities for your students to learn about how to discuss difficult topics such as gender roles, sexuality, slavery, human trafficking, etc. For example, when I teach Roman slavery, they have their final project is an infographic that has facts on 10 facts about ancient Roman slavery, 10 facts about American slavery, 10 facts about modern human trafficking, and as well as the address and phone number of where you can go for help if you see it in the world. So there are ways that you can expand. Teach students how to discuss uncomfortable topics through modeling, rubrics, Socratic seminars, and this thing called tennis matches. This is not my term, this is a pedagogy thing. Have any of you heard of tennis matches? Raise your hand if you. Okay, so a tennis match is a great idea. You start small with something very comfortable, like hot dogs versus hamburgers, or something that is not threatening, Disney versus Marvel, and you start with 2 students, and they pick a side, and they usually have to pick the side they don't want. And then one student has 1 minute to discuss their viewpoint. The second student has a minute to say their viewpoint, and then they each have a 30-second rebuttal. And in doing that, that is rated or judged by the rest of the classmates to see like, oh, well, this is your argument. I like how you did this for your argument, this your argument. And it teaches kids how to properly discuss something that's controversial without it getting into like name calling and insults. So if you can model that so they know how to communicate effectively. Just know we're not all perfect, and neither are all classes. It's all a matter of the mixture of students that you have. Some classrooms are going to have great dynamics, you can have great conversations. In some classrooms, you're going to try. It's not necessarily going to work so well. So that's in your classroom. In beyond your classroom, as an educator, continue to advocate for your students by working with or challenging your school infrastructure to create a safer school environment for all students, whether it's community work, providing a presentation to the board, starting a program, starting a club. Help make the school a better place. Be part of, do not check out at 2:50, right? Do what you can do to make sure that you are part of the community, just like your students are part of the community. And then if you can, either create or interpret the curriculum in a way that is inclusive and broadens students' critical thinking skills and empathy. I know I am lucky because I am the only Latin teacher in my school district. So the curriculum is mine, right? And it is read by me and my supervisor and sometimes the board when they rubber stamp it. I know there are some larger districts where you're one of 300 students, like if you work for the New York public school system, like you guys aren't really in as much control of your curriculum. So that's a matter of interpretation, but you can still interpret it in a way that is inclusive. In order to create a more inclusive classroom, it's necessary for students to understand the target culture as a whole, okay? And all of our curricula is written according to the standards of the ACTFL, the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Languages. And they are all about the 5 C's and the 3 P's. So whether you are a public school or a public school teacher in, Kansas or Idaho or New Jersey, all of our state standards are based on ACTFL. Our world language or both world language and classical language learning standards are based on what ACTFL wants, and they are about embracing the 5 C's: communities, communication, cultures, connections, and comparisons, as well as the 3 P's: the products, the practices, and the peoples. So you cannot remove a C and just pretend that, oh, just these 4 C's work. You need a whole picture. That's what they're encouraging you to give a full picture of the target culture. Now, if you are uncomfortable talking about LGBTQIA concepts, you can still use the veil of ancient practices that we have been using for decades as Latin teachers. In our classroom, we talk about a lot of controversial things already. We talk about rape myths. We talk about polytheism versus the rise of monotheism. We talk about human sacrifice. We talk about gladiators. We talk about slavery. We talk about child brides and Rowan marriage. We talk about all of these things that are very controversial and very, that can be very upsetting. So why is it that, we can talk about Jupiter becoming a swan and 9 months later Helen is born, but we can't talk about 2 boys kissing? It makes no sense. So we do this every day without batting an eye. So we need to be more comfortable batting, expanding our scope without fear of repercussions. So what you can do in your classroom. I have some examples. The first thing you can do is just empower your students with choice. So for example, I teach active and passive with manipulatives, right? With a puella, a poeta, a regina, and a pirata. First declension, so it's nice and easy. It's all first declension. They only have to know nominative, accusative, and ablative. And they have arrows telling them, oh, if it's active, you need an accusative arrow, and if it's passive, you need an ablative arrow. So who cares if the puella loves a poetam or regina? It doesn't matter. And that's, if a kid wants to show their choice that way, let them, right? You can empower students with choices. Another example I give We give Trojan War Valentines, okay? And there are the hetero couples, but there are also men and female, male, female, woman, concepts, as well as non-romantic options. There's parental bonds, there's mentor bonds, and there's hatred bonds. So it's not like I'm showing choices. It's, hey, pick one aspect and do it. So there's plenty of choices, but again, the burden is on you that, you would have to make sure that you give them a whole lot of different options. The other thing you can do is to empower students to analyze and empathize. So we as adults know that gender and sexuality are social constructs that change over time, right? We all know this. Students might not. They definitely do not. And one of the things you can do in understanding is helping them to challenge gender roles. So when I was a kid, I am not an organized person. As you saw, my water was way over there. I didn't know what my water was. I'm not necessarily organized. And as a kid, I absolutely hated graphic organizers and matrices. Man, why are you making me do this? But it's so helpful to help get students to think in terms of how are things different. So for example, I have the modern, students can fill out modern gender roles. So like women should, women can't, men should, men can't. And that helps the conversation on what about people who don't fall into that category, and you can expand that. And then what you can do is you can compare that to the Roman system of very rigid gender roles, and you can have a discussion like, what is changing, what is true about society, like what is society telling us about gender. The other thing I like to do is help them challenge the views of sexuality as constructs based on their society. So for example, I think we all know the story of Adam and Eve, right? Anyone not know Adam and Eve, Genesis, the whole like, I'm made from a rib. That's all I am. I'm basically a rib sandwich, so thanks. So I compare that to Plato's view of soulmates, right? Which I don't know if you are familiar with, was turned into a song in Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Right, that's a very powerful song, and they need to know that there are more than one way of thinking about human beings as just the dichotomy man versus woman. And that tells you, again, you can think about how that piece of literature is reflecting the society that I have another thing that you can do, especially during Pride Week, and as you can see, I'm wearing it, is a declaration of love and support. This is in Virgil's Aeneid, so if any of you are teaching AP, then hint, hint, this can fit very easily in the AP curriculum. This is Virgil's Aeneid. This is done, I don't know if you know Nisus and Euryalus are the gay couple in Virgil's Aeneid. And they have a tragic end in book 9. And this is given from Ascanius, Aeneas' son, in love and support of Euryalus. And it's just beautiful. I have never seen 20 words in Latin that is more beautiful than this. And I like sharing it with all of my levels during Pride Week. I have a tiered reading. I don't know if you're familiar with tiered reading, so you can adjust the readability level just like you used to do that in like elementary school. Your homework was different than in middle school. So you can adjust the readability level. I have one that's basic level 1, accusative, nominative, present tense. I have one that is a little bit more difficult. It uses third declension nouns. And then I have the full-on Virgil quote. What I also do, and you might find cheesy, but I don't care. I have on my website the lesson plan that makes that. All you need access to is you have a wristband, te accipio, I welcome, I accept you, I embrace you. I made these out of a color printer, and then you get sticky tabs. Or you can use, if you're super cheap, you can just use double-sided tape. This cost $4 for me to make. I made 70, and I hope there are enough, because I see enough seats. So I hope you will take one. I will not be offended if you do not take one, but you can always print them. The template is online. is on my website that you may have. Sorry, but I have to. Philly pride. Woo, anyone Philly? Come on. Yay, Philly. Woo, Philly. I'm sorry. Okay. So, but that is something that anyone and everyone can do, even at level 1, as long as they know the nominative and accusative and present tense, which is the very basic thing they can learn. So the other thing you can do is empower students to research, and this is my blog. I have Latin Greek passages. I have modern tags. So at the bottom, you can, if you're like, oh, I wonder what are some perspectives of blah, you can just click it and whatever it needs will pop up. I have trigger warnings for some of the things. So for example, intersex Romans were not necessarily treated very well. So I have trigger warnings on, there's some violence in here, but everything that I write is high school appropriate. It's basically Disney rated. So I do not have any satyrs getting fillated. It is all nice and G-rated. It is something that you would want your 14-year-old son or daughter or child or student to see. Now, I started this in September and I'm really trying, and I have 70 posts. So this summer, when I have less things on my plate, I intend to go and do a phase 2 with comprehension questions and offer information, make it a little bit prettier than this is just basically blogger.com. Couple more things. I know you guys have stuff to do. So again, as I said, the liberal search can help students compare readings on certain topics. So I know, and I have to quick disclaimer, it's like the first post I write. Okay. Again, gender, sexuality are things that are defined by the society that creates it. There is no Rowan was gay, right? There were no lesbians, right? The word mollis does not mean gay. It's not specifically one-to-one. There were no asexuals in the ancient world. There were no trans people in the ancient world. It's a totally different system, and I know that. However, I do use modern tags because a kid who's 16 doesn't know that, and they're not going to be like, oh, I wonder what a tree this is. So I do use modern tags to help the students and for the ease of the modern reader. So using this, you can say like, oh, what are martial views on women? Or how are asexual men or women treated? Or how are trans men or women treated? And you can just click and it shows you, it automatically filters the sites. I do for the advanced people, teachers who teach advanced students. I have another example of the text that I just want everyone to know about. It's the Messianic. It's Echo 4. It is amazing. It is 2 poets are in a grove, and they're both in love, and they're like longing for their love. And one is for love of a lady, and one is in love for a lad. And it's so interesting to see they both get their own little chorus of how they want to woo their person of interest. And it's so interesting to see how little gender plays into it, because it's all, you're not getting any younger, so TikTok, come love on me. And it's so interesting to see how gender is played such a little role on it. And it's such a story of just absolute allyship, right? There's no like, oh, look at this is an LGBTQ statement. It's just 2 people being normal, like, oh, hey, I'm having boy problems. Oh, I'm having girl problems. And it's a great thing, and it ends with this line, let each one sing of whatever they love, whatever it is, for singing helps lighten our cares, right? And that's just beautiful, and it's so inclusive. It's not like, oh, girls are the best to love, or boys are the best to love. It's just whatever you got, it's great, just sing about it. I do also have some readings that I put on here to kind of help with the romantic terminology and understanding how different sexuality is in the ancient Roman world. This is not exhaustive, like I'm doing this 4 hours a week, so the summer and that is, I definitely need a little help. I would love it if I can get any feedback, suggestions, like, oh, hey, you know, there's this cool Cicero quote, oh, Libby does this cool thing. I would love extra help in getting more up there. I also would love some submissions. If you want to give me a text that you translated, I have no problem giving you an author credit. Like, oh, this is from, you know, blah, blah. Or lesson plans that you would like to share. I definitely would like them. I only have 6 so far. I mean, I'm happy with 6. You know, yay, I got a good start. But yeah, so this is definitely in its infancy, and I really want to see it grow. So thanks. Remember, this is about them. We are here to help make our students have become the empathetic world citizens that they are meant to be. We are helping to make the world better. So whatever we can do for them is why we're here. Any questions? Oh, I guess, yeah.